Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present at this session. Before I actually get into my discourse, there are a few things I just wanted to mention. Okay, of course, very, very thought-provoking session from Kerry-Ann and Bartlett. Bartlett mentioned that that it's sort of up to the organization, with the exception of if there is any sort of terrorist, ties to pay ransomware. Before changing rules, I would have worked in 32 countries within the region in the Caribbean and South America. And from January to April 2021, I would have been privy to working with 38 organizations who have experienced ransomware attacks. One of them would have paid a ransom of $7 million US, and did not get the decryption code. So that was, I think, a mistake on their part. And another organization actually paid a smaller ransomware, a smaller ransom of about $500,000 US. They got the decryption code. The files were decrypted, and within 24 hours, it was re-encrypted again, and they were hit with another ransom. So, the experiences that I've seen over the past years of organizations paying ransom has not really worked out at all. We also have to look at, Bartlett mentioned terrorist organizations, but it's not just organizations, there are a lot of state actors. If you want to think about a country like North Korea, how is North Korea generating revenue and running that country? It's estimated that they would have earned at least $16 billion from ransomware attacks in the first quarter of this year. I don't have statistics for second quarter or third quarter, but just put that into perspective. Okay, this year is a very organized business, not just by bespoke little organizations, but by states and governments. And one more thing that was mentioned again in Bartlett's presentation was organizations moving to the cloud and some demarcation there. But my experience has been that a lot of organizations in the region especially are playing smart with foolishness and trying to abdicate responsibility by putting their data in the cloud and saying, hey, my hands are clean. Amazon or Microsoft Azure or GCP from Google Cloud actually has X level of certification, and that's good enough. But it's not the case. It's like buying a pizza at Chefette's. Okay, if you own and manage something, then all the responsibility for the data and the infrastructure belongs to you. If you outsource it, it's not like buying a pizza in Chefette where you outsource that pizza service. They're responsible for everything, for the ingredients, cooking it. If you find a fingernail in it, then you can go blame them. But with data, it's different. Okay, you own the data and you still have that responsibility for it. So you can think about it as buying a frozen pizza in the supermarket and you taking it home to bake it. Okay, if anything happens there and you find it, there's still a possibility, okay, that fingernail belongs to you. So outsourcing doesn't really absolve you of responsibility. You're still the owner of the data and it's your responsibility to sort it. There was one other thing that was mentioned during the discourse about bare minimum security. It's something that causes my hairline to recede. When customers ask me what's the bare minimum they can do, I tell them, hey, the security is like, it's like being pregnant. It's either you're in or you're out. There's no in between. There's no bare minimum security. It's either you're secure or you're not secure. So that's again a personal take on security. And last, before I get into my presentation, I'm sure there are a lot of organizations before development and implementation and enforcement of these data protection acts would have already started on a compliance program, either from ISO, PCI DSS, you know, or HIPAA or whatever. There is a neat little tool. Let me share my screen here. Yeah, that you can use to correlate all of these standards if you actually started working on anything, called the Cloud Control Matrix. I'm very intimate with this. During the introduction, and Charles would have mentioned that I worked on this, one of the first revisions. This is version 3. There are actually newer ones to this. So what you're gonna find is, let me find that NIST here. Okay, so you're gonna find all the controls for NIST. Okay, and most any other standard or framework out there in the industry, ISO, okay, HITRUST, HIPAA, FedRAMP, and so on. You can take whatever you've done and basically cross-reference it, so you don't have to start from scratch. If anybody wants this, I'll send it to the to Charles and the BISSA team that you can share it. In fact, this is our older version, the last one that I worked on. There are newer ones that I'll share. So having said that, burning a lot of time here, let me just quickly get into my presentation. Okay. So in the context of attacks and ransomware, globally for 2021, 1 out of every 61 organizations is actually breached by ransomware each week. This data comes from one of the world's largest threat intelligence sources, coincidentally, from my employer. Anyone that's interested in having a look at these live attacks can go to threatmap.checkpoint.com. Okay. Just to set a framework of what ransomware is, so we don't take it for granted that everyone knows what it is. Ransomware basically is some sort of malware that encrypts files stored on a computer. Could be on a server or other type of computer-related device. And the aggressor or attacker demands that the user pay a ransom to either decrypt or to restore, or whatever you want to think about it, that particular file or folder. We mentioned earlier that paying that ransom doesn't necessarily guarantee that you get that decryption key. I mentioned that $7 million ransom that was paid. I thought it was pretty silly. All right. Okay, so I maybe have about 2 minutes again. Let's quickly get through this. Okay, so how is ransomware propagated? The first 2 speakers spoke about regulations and so on. A lot of people will think it's technology, but there are different elements that actually contribute to any sort of attack, not just ransomware propagating, people, processes, and technologies. Okay, there's a misconception about regulations actually being able to prevent certain attacks. Okay, I think regulations will assist organizations in having a baseline and actually give some protections and safeguards. Okay, and the first instinct of organizations really is to try and just throw money at technology, but that's not always, you know, the answer. I'll give a few examples of how and why that happened. Like I mentioned during the introduction, there's been like 38 ransomware breaches in the region between January to April that I had visibility of, and where the people element would have contributing. In one of those organizations, a senior executive just dismissed any notion that they were doing anything wrong. Okay, an assessment was done of their organization. This is before the attack, and it was dismissed. A few months later, they were attacked, and basically that organization went down for, when I say went down, every single point of sale, terminal, network, cloud, I mean, you name it. Nothing was accessible for that organization for 12 days. Okay, this isn't the one in country though. Okay, that had a lot of visibility that everyone would be thinking. There are some other elements of that people sort of factor that may contribute to it. You'll have some disingenuous providers indicating that that maybe a solution could prevent or stop an attack when in reality it can't. The competence of people, and of course awareness and education, which some people would have asked questions about in the previous session. Processes has some relationships to everyone. None of these actually stand on their own. And a couple of examples here. One major organization, I think one of the biggest that I have had the displeasure of working on in the region. People were quick to judge because there was a lot of public opinion and visibility of this particular attack. It turned out that the security professionals were aware of the actual gaps in that organization, and they made numerous requests to their business leaders to address it, and it was turned down. Now, one can argue that maybe their pitch wasn't good enough, or they didn't do a good enough job to to make a business case to address the issues. But the end result is, either way, it's something to do with the way that organization manages risks. Okay, and the process of managing risks. Sometimes organizations may not have the proper checks and balances. I know of one attack that took place through social engineering. Someone, a malicious actor, actually went into the reception desk and begged the receptionist to help him open a file and print it for a job interview. Okay, turned out that it was a mistake. It was a deliberate attack. Okay, and that particular ransomware attack took place through that USB drive and the receptionist. And these sort of things, you think it's obvious, but as I think Caribbean people especially, we want to be helpful and personable and so on. There comes a time where we have to actually follow processes and regulations or whatever it is, but there is definitely some link there, okay, that is missing within the whole framework of people understanding risk. Technology, again, that one is a lot obvious. Inadequate technology or technology not being used properly, and or maybe the organization has the proper technology but not the skill set or the people or processes to actually execute on protecting the organization's assets properly. I'll give an example of one attack that took place where alarm bells were going off. I tried to sanitize this so the organization wouldn't be exposed, but for several weeks, okay, it was seen that, what is this, China, the US, Belgium, Germany, and other countries were connecting into their organization, and the technology was working. Okay, alerts were being sent. Okay, people probably got the alerts and ignored it. I don't know. Sometimes people are not sure what to do with an alert, or they have alert fatigue. Okay. But it also calls into question, again, it's not just the technology, it's people, process, everything built into one. So buying that technology, investing in it, putting in those controls really is only a part of the solution. Okay, I'm a little aware of the time here, so I'll move quickly. This is sort of anatomy of one of the attacks that took place. A different one from a state actor again. This one was from the People's Liberation Army of China. That's their logo here. These guys do nothing else except infiltrate organizations, okay, and do this sort of stuff. The ransomware, this particular ransomware attack wasn't just, hey, you click on a file and you get infected with ransomware. It started with a phishing email, okay? Clicking on that phishing email would have infected the machine with a sort of latent malware that didn't really do anything obvious, okay, except send out command and control communications to a server in China, okay. The organization's firewall would have blocked any incoming traffic, not the outgoing. A lot of people don't necessarily block outgoing traffic, but it blocked the incoming traffic. So when this person took their laptop home where there wasn't any firewall protection, okay, that command and control connection was established, and then a bot was downloaded, and a few days after, that bot would have contained, okay, some element of the ransomware executable. When the person goes back into the office, they would have carried that ransomware and it would have spread laterally throughout the organization. So sometimes not a very simple process of somebody just clicking on something and ransomware executes, or ransomware can easily be detected. Okay. Moving on, we're going to look at some regional stats here, and it's again from the first two speakers. It's very interesting, and again, I said thought-provoking, and I'd like people maybe to I mean, we have a couple lawyers who did the first two, so I'm sure they wouldn't want to jump to conclusion, but you make your own assessment here on the types of countries that have the highest incidence of attacks versus those that have a lower incident of attack, and the state of their regulatory adoption within country. So I'll start. The first time I would have worked with this team was in 2019. These are stats from 2019 for all of Central America and the Caribbean. What we're seeing here is basically Central America and the Caribbean had almost twice the amount of attacks than the global average. Graphically, this is what it looked like. Okay, well, 600, 1200 on this side. Okay, so, and this is 2 years ago. Okay, we could probably understand why it was happening. I don't know. If you were to put yourselves in the shoes of an attacker, what path would you choose? Most attackers, and you could think of maybe a burglar. Okay, what house would you choose to break into? One with no security systems or burglar bars, burglar proofs, whatever you call it. Okay, or one that's secured to the teeth and the owner has a firearm. Okay, I think that's the correlation here between some other countries and our region. You know, where the home with windows open and no security. Okay. Yep. A couple of years ago, in Central America and the Caribbean, this little island, okay, ranked number 2 in total number of attacks. 2 years ago. Now moving ahead to 2021, I mean, the stats have more or less diminished in terms of the percentages, but we're still 100% more than the global average, okay? For everything from ransomware to bots and crypto miners and so on. Okay, what this looks from a graphical perspective. And again, anybody wants this information, it will be in the hands of the BISSA team, and they will disseminate it as they have it. Okay, so this is Central America and the Caribbean. Okay, the most targeted countries for 2021. Again, look at the list here. Okay. Colombia is number one. We're seeing another Caribbean country here, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Panama. You know, try and again, it could just be causation or whatever, but it can't just be coincidence that a lot of these countries have a lot of loose and weak regulations. And I shouldn't say weak, sorry, let me rephrase that. And they're now on their journey to implementing regulations and enforcement, compared to where you see lighter colors. Okay. This here graph is for the entire Western Hemisphere. Again, when you look at the entire Western Hemisphere, you would think that just based on numbers, North America, either US or Canada, has a lot more businesses. Why is a little island like Bermuda featuring there? Okay, so it speaks to something that is peculiar, okay, within our region. Okay, this here again, all of the Western Hemisphere, all of the Americas. This one is for Central America and the Caribbean. Okay, Central America, basically the way that the tool that was used to generate this includes the north countries of South America. It's labeled from my organization's perspective as part of our same business unit. Okay, and here are some stats that that I compiled for the local environment. Again, the tool that was used to compile this is arguably the largest threat intelligence tool in the world, ingesting more than 8 billion attacks daily, and with over 10 billion sensors reporting into it. I know that I would have taken up a little extra time there, Charles, so forgive me for it. And thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Roland. That's no problem. Fairly interesting information. I'm sure we'll get quite a few questions, and persons will definitely be interested in getting access to that information in terms of the stats. So thank you very much. And we move on now to Francois. And Francois, you're up to do your presentation.
Thanks, Charles. Just making sure everybody can hear me at this time.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes, we're good with your screen.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to speak. It's obviously going to be difficult coming after such esteemed speakers so far, but I will do my best as I'm on the tail end here to keep everybody awake. So today I'm going to talk very, very locally here, as would have been explained through Charles about what I do. I am an actual practitioner on the ground who investigates and responds to cybersecurity incidents. Now, I guess in lieu of actual reporting that's not being mandated at this time yet, I have taken some statistics from our own case logs to show and see, just to portray that ransomware really is a problem, and we do get ransomware attacks here relatively regularly. And this is just from ransomware issues, ransomware incidents that I have been involved with and my organization. We look at some of the common areas within those incidents of exploitation that you see in organizations. I'm actually I just slipped this in again. I actually took this out, but based on Roland's presentation, I thought he set me up too good. I slipped back in the demonstration to show people how a ransomware attack actually unfolds. What happens, how the bad actor within an organization that targets the organization actually can move laterally, and how quickly information can be encrypted within a matter of hours. We look at the business model and how that has changed from being a one-to-many relationship between the ransomware operators and the victims. And we look at some common risk factors. Recovery options, we already spoke about whether or not we should pay or not. I may have some thoughts on that myself, and the impacts of the incidents that I would have responded to here. How did it affect the companies? How did it affect the organizations? And also give a government perspective in all this. So between 2018 and 2021, these are the major incidents that we would have responded to. As you can see, the bulk of the cyber attacks are actually business email compromise. Unfortunately, we're not touching on that today. Maybe next year, Dwight, we can have that as a key issue, because we do see a lot of that. But ransomware was right behind that 27%. Now, the major attack vector, what the cyber criminal or the threat actor would have exploited, is through remote desktop connection, which, if you don't know, a remote desktop connection, administrators like to use that because they can remotely access the network from wherever they are. Especially now, it's being used a lot because of the pandemic. Lots of people are home, lots of people accessing their networks remotely. Now, this has been a major vulnerability within organizations who have not put controls around RDP access, because it can be brute force. So what happens? RDP, remote desktop, listens on the network, listens on the internet. Port 3389 is the default port. So cyber criminals know that, and they have scripts. They're tools that can scan IPs for specific ports across the entire internet range. You can specify as well just for Barbados, and you can do that scan in a matter of minutes. And once you get hits to port 3389, then you have an automated password dictionary that you can launch and crack weak passwords. The technology is not as it was before, that you'd have needed computing power that would fill 2 houses in order to crack passwords of up to 8 characters quickly. Now you can do that again in a matter of minutes, especially if they're weak. So this is the main attack vector that bad actors are using. This is an actual case I'm going to show you very quickly about a real incident that we have responded to. This is the data, what was being demonstrated are the indicators of compromise that I would have put together, how things would have happened from the very beginning to the actual data being encrypted. So what you're seeing now is attacks coming from, dictionary attacks coming from Estonia to a particular corporation in Barbados. The line that's highlighted in blue is this is not the actual password, I would say, but the password was extremely, extremely weak. And eventually the bad actor would have gained access to the server. Pay attention to the timeline in the bottom left-hand corner and the script at the top. It's telling you, let you know what's happening. So the bad actor would have accessed the server through RDP. and would have gained administrative credentials. From there, the bad actor would have dropped the ransomware payload on the desktop of the first server, and then would have executed it. After execution, the ransomware calls back to the command and control server for encryption, for the encryption key based on a unique ID. This is public key encryption. The private key is held in command and control. Without that, you cannot decrypt. So the files on the server are being encrypted at this time. Now, if you have attached backups, the attached backups are also being decrypted because the backup is mapped to the server. The bot had then moved laterally and encrypted point-of-sale machines in the organization. Again, moved on to server number 2, the same routine. Drop files, launch the encryption. This same backup device was attached to server number 2 as well. So that was encrypted on top of the first encryption, had a new ID, and then moved laterally again to the point-of-sale machines that were connected to this server. Moved on to server 3, same routine, executed, encrypt backup device number 2, and then encrypted the point-of-sale machines. So from 2:30 a.m. to 10:24 a.m., that happened. It can happen a lot quicker than that too. But there's no, I think we all know why the bad actor would have entered the environment at 2:30 a.m. Because if you're running an environment that doesn't have any monitoring, then nobody's going to be at work. So they can work under stealth. The model of ransomware, the business model. So previously, the traditional business model, you have one ransomware operator, you have a bunch of victims. So the ransomware operator, his responsibility is to get the actual ransomware payload, set up targets. Perhaps you're using phishing methods in order to infect your victims. So you have to put all of the process together and send to your victims, and then you gain 100% of the proceeds. Now this ransomware as a service, the ransomware operator sets up the whole thing, removes the direct liability from himself and the responsibility to attract victims to people who are going to pay him a percentage to then get victims of ransomware for themselves. So as you can see, for the ransomware operator, it's great because he no longer has that responsibility to get people to actually pay the ransom. He has people that will do that for him while he gets a small cut. And that's kind of changing the landscape for ransomware. It's growing exponentially and it's easy to use. These are very user-friendly mechanisms that are being used now. You no longer need to know anything at all. My grandmother can sign up on the dark web for ransomware as a service, and she can run an organized ransomware campaign using this technology. So what are some of the common risk factors that I see in organizations that get hit by ransomware here in Barbados? Underestimating security awareness. Now, security awareness is, I would consider, the best bang for your buck to secure your environment. Your users are your last line of defense. You know, expensive firewalls are great when configured properly and administered appropriately in your organization. There are many different controls that I would also recommend that organizations do, which we will talk about a little bit later. But if you can secure your users that will get an email, that will try to be phished, that will get an attachment that is laced with some malware, it could be ransomware, to let them know what to expect. What are the indicators that this is a fraudulent email? What are the indicators that this is phishing? What are the indicators that this is something that you should just delete from your inbox and move on? Security awareness training is key. It's a critical aspect of your defense in depth strategy in your organization. Many legacy systems on infrastructure. Any operating system that you're running that is not being supported is a risk. And it's a major vulnerability within organizations. We had WannaCry that utilized a vulnerability within operating systems that were out of support. So this is something that we see too often. We talked a lot about policy development in this forum already. Organizations that do not have a patch management policy, they don't upgrade their applications. Therefore, there are vulnerabilities that are known, and they're known to bad actors, and bad actors exploit that. Flat networks. Now, flat networks were great because it's easier to implement. But guess what? When ransomware, as during the demonstration I would have shown, once you have access, especially administrator access, and you have a flat network, you have free reign to encrypt everything, which will grind all business services and systems to a halt. So if you segment your network topology, you have a better chance of isolating an incident when a threat actor gets into your environment. Inadequate backup and restoration practices. Now, I can count on too many fingers how many times we've gone to an incident and we ask them, when was your last good backup? And they bring it, and when we check it, we realize that the last good backup was actually last year. This is a major problem because organizations tend to not check their backups by restoring it and checking the integrity of them. So even though you're getting those alerts saying that it was backed up, a lot of the times it's not. So having a good backup and restoration policy in place is vital. When ransomware hits, if you have a good backup, then you don't need to worry about paying the ransom. You need to worry about restoring your systems and getting your data back online through those good backups. If you don't have a good backup and your backups have been hit, because cyber criminals also search for if the ransomware cannot find your backup, if it's connected, if cyber criminals have time in your environment, they will scan it and they will find the backup via the IP. If it's not password protected, they will just go in and delete it. We see that a lot as well. Access control oversight, limited. So your Active Directory, your user rights and permissions. A lot of organizations don't have good oversight on this. Therefore, usernames can be vulnerable. You have users that have left the organization that still have their username and password in there. It could be weak. Those could be attacked. Bad actors themselves who come in, and we've seen them in networks for over 9 months, 12 months. They've created their own username and coming in at using administrative credentials that they themselves set up. If you were looking over your access control, then you would be able to say, hey, I don't know this person doesn't belong in this environment, and then you will be able to do an investigation and get to the bottom of that. Low security budget. As Roland rightfully said, either you're putting security in place or you're not. There's nothing such as a half measure towards security. Security is an defense in-depth process. You keep adding layers, but either you're committed to applying security within an organization or you're not. The ones that are committed fare a lot better than the ones who are not. Recovery options, like I said, recover from a good backup. If you have a good backup, that's great. If you don't, then you're in trouble. You have other things to contemplate. Decryption tools, nomoreransom.org has decryption tools, but I must warn you, I think only one time since I have been, or maybe twice, very early, I was able to decrypt ransomware because of the type of encryption methods that were being used then and the tools that they had. There are organizations, Kaspersky, McAfee, and others with Europol that spend time trying to find the decryption key of ransomware variants through FBI busts. Sometimes there was a time where the Dharma ransomware creators actually apologized and gave the keys publicly, said they're sorry. That doesn't happen often. So we can't rely on getting decryption tools. That's very, very rare today. Should we pay the ransom? We went through this. I say no, just because ransomware actually feeds the payment feeds the industry. If there was regulation in place that said you could not pay, then if you cannot pay, then there will be no industry because money won't be coming in. The reason why it continues to exponentially grow is because it continues to be exponentially lucrative. Ransomware payments have skyrocketed over the last 2 years. Also, as Roland rightfully said, there's never a guarantee that you're going to get the money back. And we're dealing with cyber criminals. If you pay, then you know that you're a paying customer. Hey, if you could pay 7 million, then hey, guess what? I want another 7 before I give you the decryption key. You can't trust criminals, so that can happen. So I would strongly recommend not paying the ransom. Obviously, we have the reputational damage of impact, customer attrition. I think that was spoken about when customers recognize that you have been hit and your systems are down. While your systems are down, they go to check the competition. A lot of the times they don't come back. Direct revenue loss from not having your services up and running, and user productivity, literal recovery costs, what it costs to replace equipment, what it costs to investigate. Fines and penalties, we're talking, I think, 500,000 Barbados dollars now with the Data Protection Act. If you are deemed to be negligent in the way you protect customer data, that's something that organizations have to look at now. And employee retention. You lose good employees when you get breached, the system's going to a halt. Organizations would need to perhaps downscale, and you might lose good people to other organizations in that way as well. Are we ready for the threat as a government in the midst of digital transformation? As we begin to continue to integrate into our services, as we continue to open up those services to the public, energy, telecommunications, financial services, healthcare, national insurance, we have to be very aware that there are state actors, nation state actors, as Roland said, that are in the business of disrupting the delivery of essential services. We saw it with the pipeline. You know, it's really a public awareness situation. The government of Barbados will need to really step up and sensitize the public, because it is really a public safety, national security, and economic development issue. Because if we are pushing a digital transformation, if we're trying to get more and more users to buy in, the only way they will buy in if they are assured that their information is being protected, if they can be confident in the government's actions while protecting the government's own critical infrastructure, and then subsequently the data that we own as citizens. So it's absolutely critical that the government gains the public's trust in this domain. The only way to really put this in perspective is through the National Cybersecurity Strategy. I'm very well aware that the strategy is on its way to implementation, but that is really just the beginning. With that, then comes a framework and a standard that must spread across all government critical infrastructure. Once the government critical infrastructure reaches that standard that the strategy would set, then we need to make sure that we provide the funds to the departments to make sure that once it is set, that it can be maintained. Because we all know that that is going to be the cry. Okay, these standards are great, but if we don't have the funds to enact these policies, then you're spinning the top in mud. It will stop before it starts. And that is the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you, Francois. I want to pose a question to you that goes back to the last slide. It speaks primarily to that last slide. And question came is, are Caribbean leaders cyber aware enough to develop the proper cybersecurity or proper security culture that is required in their organizations?
Are they cyber aware enough? It's difficult to say. I will say that cybersecurity must be implemented via a top-down approach. So if they're not aware enough, they really must be, because in order for the country to buy in, the directives and the narrative surrounding cybersecurity must stem from leadership. The very same way that our Prime Minister now is really taking the lead on the COVID-19 fight and the policies and the right down to making direct pleas to the public in terms of how they're supposed to continue to maintain protocols to keep all of us safe from the COVID-19 pandemic and help stimulate the economy by reducing the numbers of cases. The same way the leadership must react to the cybersecurity issue, because if that message isn't sent, then the results are the same. Like I said, it's a public safety, national health situation. If our systems and services were shut down, you know, we are looking at an economy that will grind to a halt. So it is really, really, really important for that message to be pushed from the very top.
Roland, I want to bring this question to you, and it comes out of your presentation, because in your example on an incident we had in the Caribbean, you mentioned, and it comes back to something that Francois was just saying in terms of leadership from the top down, having adequate resources. You mentioned that in this particular case, leadership was aware that the IT professionals, the security professionals had made numerous warnings or given numerous warnings, and yet the leadership did not budge. I know Francois also mentioned that information security awareness is critical. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. Is there a special type of awareness that needs to be given to the leadership in organizations, both in the government sector and private sector, for them to get it? Is it that the IT professionals or the information security professionals need to be trained in how to present the business case convincingly enough? What is required so that we can get the leadership to buy in and do what is necessary?
Now, Charles, if I had the silver bullet, simple answer to that, you know, I'd be a rich man. But from what I've seen, like in this particular case, you know, the response from that leader was, hey, you know, they have cyber insurance. If anything happens, you know, they'll deal with it, right? They didn't really take it seriously until a huge incident happened. And I think hopefully after that huge incident, they got a little, you know, shell-shocked, okay? I don't think they expected that incident to be so large. In terms of if there are specialized executive training, yes, there is. So to answer your question directly, there is like targeted executive type training, not just for cybersecurity, but for personal safety also. Okay. And I'll give you a simple example, like, you know, during some of those types of training, they cover both cyber and personal safety. One of those things that they cover that I've sat through is if you turn your car's ignition, for instance, and it doesn't turn over, it's very likely that somebody would have planted a bomb in your car. So don't try to start it again, right? Walk away and get somebody to check it for you. So executive security is something that's very targeted and yes, needs to be done, and done in a different way from the rest of the employee base, because executives are targeted. Yeah, Francois mentioned phishing. There's whale phishing. Executives are targeted specifically, not only them, but their wives, their children, their husbands, their grandmothers, everybody. And there was a recent incident with a major financial institution, again, within the region. 3 years ago, during one of my sales scouting expeditions, we would have done a complimentary surface scan of this executive's real estate, not on their network, because we don't touch people's corporate network. We just scan the public dark web, social media, and so on. And we found that this executive's account, okay, the usernames and passwords were being sold on the dark web. We dug a little further and found about 200 people in that organization, okay, with their usernames and passwords compromised. I'd set up a meeting with that particular executive and told them they were very shaken about it. Calling the information security team. The information security team asked for the next steps. We recommended it. They found it was too expensive to remediate. Now, nothing happened that year, nothing happened the following year, but last year, the organization had a major breach. They called us in to investigate, and it just so happened that what we did was similar to what Francois outlined with that anatomy of an attack. Okay, basically, when we pitched the remediation work to them, okay, we said, this is likely what will happen. They asked if we were sure it would happen. We said, we don't know. Okay, because these guys could be doing anything. They could be selling the information. They could be to somebody else to carry out the attack. They themselves could be carrying it out. We don't know. Okay, what we can do is offer a service to remediate, and we could offer a service to go take down this malicious actor on the dark web. Okay, and work with law enforcement internationally to get them taken down. Okay, we've done that for our government already, and found someone in Brazil, and that person is in prison now. So, you know, it all depends. You can educate somebody and then they decide to do nothing with it.
Okay, thanks. Francois, and in terms of the local or the Caribbean context, what has been, because we heard from Roland in terms of the, you know, a large company in the Caribbean, what has been the reaction of the executives when you're called in and when you present your findings in terms of these ransomware attacks and, you know, your investigation? What has been the general reaction from the executives?
Varied, I will say. Sometimes Many come to mind. The CEOs of organizations, directors, they like to turn a look to IT and ask, why are we here? I was involved in an incident where this particular organization was breached. They had a major ransomware attack. All their systems were down, and we helped them to recover their information. We did the investigation, let them know what happened, provided information, just as Roland said, all the requirements needed to make sure that this type of attack, the risk is reduced. I would not say it can't happen again. And I know better than that, but that the risk is reduced from where it was. A year later, we got a call. The same issue happened. They never took our advice, and they were back there, and then the CEO was back looking at the IT manager, asking him, how come we are here again? So for that particular situation, as I saw a comment by one of my colleagues, it's not an IT issue. Cybersecurity is a convergence of all processes within an organization. Everybody is affected. The whole business ground to a halt. Downtime was days. So, and like which affects everyone. So I've seen the reaction of CEOs not wanting to take responsibility, but the responsibility really lies with them to ensure that cybersecurity is dealt with and dealt with appropriately.
Remember that earlier when the data commissioner was doing her presentation, she talked about the whole question of risk, data privacy and risk. Now, is it that persons at the C-level don't see the IT risk or the ICT risk as a genuine business risk? That's something that needs to be mitigated. I don't know if you can answer that question, either you or Roland, and if they do, what would be, and if they don't, what would be some of the things that you would advise IT professionals in terms of presenting cybersecurity and ICT security as a business risk to the C-level executives?
Well, I'll take this a little bit and then hand over to you, Francois, to just to build on. I think a technical person presenting to a non-technical person at the C-level is like me sitting through a chick flick, right? Eventually you fall asleep. So what we have to do is really retool ourselves to be able to speak business language and translate that risk into something that an executive can understand. I know a lot of people will say, and I've been doing this for close to 30 years. Okay, and I held the same position. You sent all of the information and you say, hey, here's the information. Okay. But you know, at least we do need to adapt, okay, and to be able to translate that into some sort of business risk.
Yes, I completely agree. There is a disconnect there, which is why when we go into an organization, we speak directly to the CEO. That's who we want to talk to. So we get them to understand that this issue is beyond IT, that they now need to make decisions, critical policy decisions within their organization to ensure that they understand where their vulnerabilities are and that they can mitigate the risk appropriately. At that particular juncture, when things are hot and they understand that the bottom line is not taking over, they're not getting their returns because their valuable systems and valuable assets cannot be accessed by their consumers, that is when they want to do things. When they're out of the woods, everything gets cold again, okay, we'll call you and we'll let you know if we need your services for these other mitigation requirements that you recommended. And that is usually the approach for IT, unfortunately, and it's the approach for security as well, just outing fires. So we need to get businesses, companies need to get, CEOs need to get that out of security, that outing fire culture towards cybersecurity, because you're going to find yourself in the same position again if you do not provide a holistic method of prioritizing what your risks are and treating them, applying controls and continuing to manage them, because risk will crop up all the time. You get new systems in place, there are new vulnerabilities. So unless there's a security management system in place, you will see this continuing to happen.
One other question though here on this whole question of information security systems, it's been said that the ICT professionals get all carried away with the tools and the gadgets and the technology. And I know you mentioned certain basic things that need to be done, because I think it's either you or Roland that talked about alerts were being generated, the technology was working, but was it that some person was actually paying attention to the alerts? So is it a question that, yes, while the technology is fine, is it that the security professionals now need to pay attention to, let's say, the simple measures to ensure that the security is a lot more effective? And that could go to either you or Roland.
Okay. Well, I would say security, well, again, we're assuming that these organizations have security professionals. I need to point out to you that many organizations, even some large ones here in the region, don't have a dedicated information security officer that manages security and manages risk within the organization when it comes to information security. So at the end of the day, you're still sometimes a lot of the time dealing with IT administrators who have lots to do to make sure that the systems are up and running, so they keep the lights on. So I think a major problem is not having we're talking about IT not having not looking at the simple measure that can determine like the same situation you said, whether or not their IPs, rogue IP access within their network, hitting their firewall and actually gaining access. There needs to be a position, in place for security officers to be able to operate at that level in the first place. So I think that's where the gap is. Being able to separate security from IT to start with, and having that oversight, that governance, which will encompass not just IT, not even just the CISO, but all departments within the organization.
Yeah, I just want to echo that same sort of statement. I think Edward Millington raised that point earlier in the chat, that the expectations of IT is unrealistic. Security isn't a side job, it's a dedicated position.
Correct.
And not just for cybersecurity, but also there are other elements of a CISO and a security officer that needs to move away from other departments, like the person who is in charge of facilities. Okay, that person shouldn't be managing access control. That should be with the security officer. The same way as cybersecurity shouldn't be with the IT manager. The IT manager has all sorts of different priorities to keep the business running. Okay, one of the speakers, is it Carrie-Ann? Carrie-Ann mentioned about the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. IT will always focus on that availability because that's their primary focus. Okay, you need somebody else who has a different priority to be taking care of it. So.
I've got an audience question, another audience question for you, and it has to do with the fact that, and the person is asking, so if I'm compromised, how would I know I'm having a ransomware attack? How would I know that the person who is demanding the ransom, how can I find out if they're blacklisted or they're a terrorist group? Or is there a database of groups that are known to be involved in ransomware that person can easily go to find out whether or not this is a bona fide group? And I'm thinking maybe that question is coming as to whether or not I should really pay the ransom. So is there a particular way I can go find out about that particular group that's demanding a ransom from me?
Okay, so Francois, you're doing this on a full-time basis. I'll give you first stab at it.
Right. Yes, I mean, okay, so if you got hit by ransomware, typically your files are encrypted, they have extensions, bad actors leave ransom notes to communicate with them so you can organize to pay the ransom. There are certain characteristics of the ransom notes as well as the ransomware variants that will provide you with some clues to what the variant is up from the start. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a forensic specialist. Luckily, there's a website that you can go to for you to actually upload a ransom note and an encrypted file that will then give you a good indication of what variant it is. Once you figure out what the variant is, you can then do a little bit of research and you can know what groups that particular ransomware, what group is in charge of executing and collecting funds associated with the ransomware variant that you have. So there is a way to do that.
Yep. So I'll give the Francois gave a sort of open source answer. I'll give the answer when somebody comes and has enough money to pay an organization such as the one that I'm employed with. Basically, we would ask for a copy of the ransomware binary. The ransomware binary would have what we sort of refer to as a DNA. Okay, and each organization, they don't create new ransomware for every organization. They will take their existing code and maybe tailor it a little bit. There's one particular organization that is actively attacking government agencies in the Caribbean by the name of Grim Spider. And Grim Spider basically creates an APT, an advanced persistent threat, a new attack for every government agency. And what we found is that while it's an APT, it's new. And we reverse engineer that code. We found like 90% of the code is the same. So they have their signature. It's like going to a restaurant, you know, the taste of somebody, you know how somebody codes. Every organization will have basically a sort of signature type of ransomware. For Grim Spiders, it's the RYOC, okay? And that's their specialty.
Okay, thanks. We're coming up to the last question. And, you know, we've been talking about the fact that despite there have been ransomware attacks and, you know, companies have been asked to pay ransoms and so, still persons have not taken information security, certainly at the C-level, have not taken information security seriously. The question is that now with the introduction of data privacy legislation and the fines associated with the privacy breaches and the proximity or the relationship between data privacy and information security, do you think that the threat of these huge fines would be a way now to get organizations to really take information security in the holistic view a lot more seriously?
Well, I will start. I will say the threat. No, there are lots of empty threats, but they would need to have some kind of practical example, I would say, for it to be taken seriously. The teeth of the act need to be shown, and somebody will have to take the fall in order for other organizations to wake up and say, okay, well, this is serious. This isn't, there's no discrimination here. I'm not gonna be able to call a friend of mine that I know does a high up, as they say, and get off. There's going to be real accountability associated with the act and the policies that I implement in my organization. Therefore, for me to avoid these fines, then I need to act, and I need to make sure that I have something in place that will ensure the privacy of, that I'm taking it seriously, the privacy of my customer data.
Roland, you want to weigh in?
Well, that's difficult to say, but I certainly hope so. I mean, I've been doing work in 42 countries. I'm now focused on North America, just the US and Canada now. So it's a different kettle of fish. But with all of the regulations that are there, there are still breaches. I think the occurrence of it may diminish. But again, I certainly hope so.
All right, so we've come to the end of our question and answer segment, and I want to thank you two gentlemen for first your presentations, which were very enlightening, and also taking the time to answer the questions. I want to also thank the other panelists, both Bartlett and Carrie-Ann, for their presentations so much earlier. So from me, it certainly was a pleasure moderating these two sessions. I just want to thank ISSA for the opportunity to also be here as a moderator once again in this year, and look forward to next year's activity. I noticed quite a few comments in the chat as well, where it talked about the whole question of the role of IT, how IT is expected to do certain things. And one person also suggested maybe we need to have a forum where we look at the role of IT and some of the challenges that they face, separate and distinct from this particular topic, or topic. We want to have a session dedicated to that. So that is something that both BIPA and ISSA can consider and seek to host in the future. So as I said, thank you very much, and I hand back over to Maria.